Hi, welcome to Graveyard Tales channel. Listen, top 3 horror stories. Are you ready to feel the fear? Story number 1, The Late Husband. The Late Husband is a spooky story about a young woman who has a dream in which she sees her beloved husband dying in a crash. When she wakes up, she is terrified that the dream will come true. There was a young woman who was never lucky in love. Every boyfriend she had either mistreated her or cheated on her. She was beginning to think she would never find a husband and worried that she would spend the rest of her life alone. Then, one day, she met a young man who swept her off her feet. He was kind, gentle, and caring. They began dating and gradually fell in love. When he asked her to marry him, the young woman was delighted. She immediately accepted. After the wedding, the couple moved into a little house in the suburbs, and together, they began making a life for themselves. They had to work hard in order to make the payments, but they didn't mind because they had each other. The young woman was delighted with her life and thought her happiness would never end. One night, she was waiting for her husband to come home from work. It was getting late, and when he still hadn't arrived, the woman began to get worried. She called his mobile phone, but there was no answer. Eventually, she grew tired and decided to go to bed. As she drifted off to sleep, the woman had a horrible nightmare. In the dream, she saw her husband riding his motorcycle down a darkened road. Suddenly, he swerved into the path of oncoming traffic and crashed into a truck. She watched in horror as the motorcycle skidded along the road and the truck ran over her husband's body. In the twisted wreckage, she saw his mangled corpse lying in a pool of blood. She woke up in a cold sweat and her heart was beating fast. "OMG!" she cried. "He's dead. He's dead." Sitting up in bed, she tried to calm herself down. Looking at the clock on her bedside table, she realized it was a little after midnight. Just then, she heard the familiar sound of her husband's motorcycle pulling into the driveway. As she listened closely, she heard the front door open and her husband's cheerful voice telling her that he was home. He started to explain why he was coming back so late, but the woman interrupted him. "You're really late," she shouted from the bedroom. "Why didn't you call? I was so worried. I thought you died in an accident." Downstairs, there was an eerie silence. She strained her ears to listen. Then, she heard her husband say, in a faint voice, "So, you've made your choice then?" Again, all she could hear was silence. The woman called her husband's name again and again, but there was no reply. She got out of bed and went downstairs, but the house was completely empty. Her husband was nowhere to be seen. Minutes later, the phone rang, and when she answered it, there was a policeman on the other end. "I'm sorry to be the one to inform you," he said, "but an hour ago, your husband was killed in a motorcycle accident." Story number 2. Speak of the Devil. Speak of the Devil is a spooky story about a nun who picks up a mysterious hitchhiker. There was a nun who was on her way to midnight mass one night. She was driving down a lonely country road. It was very dark outside and she was worried as it was getting late. She kissed the rosary beads around her neck and said a prayer. She glanced at her car radio's clock and saw that it was exactly 12 p.m. When she looked back at the road, she saw a tall, dark figure standing there with his thumb sticking out. She was about to drive past, but she thought she could use some company, so she pulled over to the side of the road. The man walked over to her car and opened the door. He was very tall and thin, and his face was pale white. He wore a huge overcoat and a big B-ack hat. "Do you want a ride?" she asked. He looked down upon her and smiled. "Why, sure. Where are you going?" "I'm heading to church for midnight mass," she said. "Are you going that way?" "Thereabouts," he said as her got into the back seat of the car. "Thanks for stopping. Usually, no one stops for hitchhikers this late at night." The nun smiled and drove on down the road. On the way, she told the man all about her life and her faith. He listened and laughed once in a while. As the church came into view, he leaned forward and asked her to stop. "Are you sure?" said the nun. "I could take you a little farther." As he got out, he replied, "No, I'll be good right here. I'll walk. Actually, I have someone coming for me, right near this spot." "Are you sure?" she asked, as she had seemed to like his company. No, but thank you, Clarice, for the ride. He smiled at her and then walked down the road. Then, she wondered. I never told him my name. She got out of her car and looked down at the tracks he left and screamed. Where his footprints were, there was hoof prints. She drove into Busby, arrived at the church, and told the priest about what had happened. She showed him her car, and in the back seat, there was a devil's son. Story number 3. The Fat Pig. The Fat Pig is a creepy bedtime story about a young girl who lives near a pig farm which is owned by a disturbing old man. There was a young Russian girl who lived with her parents in a small house in the countryside. There were no other children living in the remote area, so she mostly spent her time playing alone in the fields. Their neighbor was a fat man of 50 years of age who raised pigs on his small farm. She was disgusted by the constant smell of manure that came from his farm and the never-ending oinking of his pigs. Whenever she played in the fields, she would notice him standing at his fence and staring at her intently. The strange way her looked at her gave her the creeps. One night, as she was about to fall asleep, she heard a strange scratching at her bedroom window. She sat up in bed and switched on the lamp on her bedside table. The curtains suddenly parted and she screamed in horror. There was a huge, fat pig climbing in her bedroom window. Its hooves were scratching and scrabbling at the windowsill as it tried to pull itself up. She cried out for her parents as the pig struggled through the window and tumbled to the floor. It began squealing and jumped up onto her bed. The pig's dirty hooves pinned her to the mattress, and it started gnawing at her face and slobbering all over her. The terrified girl fought desperately to keep it from biting off her nose. Her face was covered in drool. Just then, her father rushed into the room, brandishing an axe. When he saw the enormous pig on top of his daughter, he let out a yell and began attacking it. The fat pig squealed and raced around the room. It lunged at the girl's father and knocked him to the floor with its weight. The axe flew out of his hands. He managed to grab hold of the pig's snout and poke it in the eyes. Hey, thanks for watching my video. Please like the video if you like, and subscribe my YouTube channel.